So, last week I took my own little field trip and I went to the Fondation Cartier, a newly remodeled museum here in Paris. The exhibition moved through strong black faces, modern art, and moments of both strength and struggle. It felt intentional. It also felt human. And this is just the first floor. I actually didn't even make it off the first floor. As I moved through the space, I wasn't expecting to think about blockchain or money at all. This was, after all, an art exhibit. But I was absolutely surprised by how clearly the themes connected. Not in an abstract way, but in a very real way. Part of the exhibition focused on migration, on how millions of people are already being forced to move because of climate pressure, political instability, or the need to survive. And it also cited projections showing that in the next 50 years, the number could dramatically grow. What stuck with me wasn't just the scale of this, it was what happens after people move. Languages fade, communities thin out, and people are often allowed to work without ever really being welcomed where they work. I didn't realize it at the time, but the exhibition was answering a question I had been circling for months. That's where my mind unexpectedly went to money and blockchain and Web3. Because when people move across borders, systems, and languages, the way money moves starts to matter in very real ways. Not as an investment, not even as a trend, just as something that has to move more based on predictability. In a world where people are being asked to adapt faster than the systems around them do. And this didn't just fall into my head out of nowhere. I didn't arrive at these thoughts through charts or white papers. I arrived at this realization while walking through a museum, one that quietly asked me to look at something familiar in a way I don't think most people in the room were looking at this at all. And to be honest, I had felt a version of this from a previous part of my life. When I used to work in freelance, I could wait weeks sometimes even months, to be paid by companies that clearly had the money. The delay wasn't like an abstract thing. It affected how I worked, how I planned, and how I could even be creative. I could do the work, I could deliver on time, but I couldn't control when I was paid. Sometimes, like I said, it was weeks, even longer. And it wasn't because the company didn't have the money, because they definitely did. They spent more on lunch for the people above the line than my rent for an entire month. That delay did something very subtle. It didn't just create stress, but it slowly pulled the creativity out of the work that was supposed to be sustaining me. I think when you're waiting or always waiting, it's hard to be actually present. That's the lens I actually want to use today to talk about stablecoins. Not as a crypto trend, but as infrastructure. At the most basic level, a stablecoin is digital money designed to not move in price. One stablecoin is meant to equal $1 today, tomorrow, next week. That doesn't sound exciting at all. And that's the entire point. Because most financial systems don't break when things move too fast. They break when people can't predict when value will arrive. On this channel, we talk a lot about speed within crypto, faster payments, instant settlement, but predictability is a quieter upgrade. Knowing that money will arrive, not maybe, not even eventually, but when you expect it to. That changes how people work, how they plan, and how they survive. Now, let's scale this feeling up. Imagine doing work in a country that doesn't fully want you there, where your labor is needed, but your presence is temporary, where access to banks, credit, or even basic accounts can disappear overnight. For millions of people already, and many more in the future, the question isn't rather money goes up or down, it's rather it moves at all. This is why I think stablecoins have drawn so much attention from banks, institutions, and regulators. Not because they're exciting, because they're not, but because they expose how fragile payment systems actually are. There's payroll, remittances, cross-border work. These are the unglamorous parts of finance, and they're where the most pressure is in the system. This is why you're seeing frameworks like MiCA in Europe and legislation within the United States focus specifically on payment stablecoins. The goal isn't speculation, it's clarity. Even if you never leave your city, even if this feels so far away from you, you've probably felt this pressure somewhere in your life before. Whether it's waiting for a paycheck, waiting on an invoice, waiting on a wire that should have cleared already. Stablecoins don't fix power imbalances completely, but they do change one thing. They reduce the distance between effort and reward. And I'm not saying stablecoins are the solution to migration or inequality or even global politics, because honestly, they're not. But in a world where people are being asked to adapt faster than institutions do, systems that move value predictably become less optional. They become part of the very foundation. I also noticed something else while researching all of this. Ripple recently shared a video on their YouTube account that starts the way I think most of the world feels right now, with headlines popping in, chaos, noise, uncertainty. And then slowly, it settled into something quieter, a grounded explanation of why stablecoins matter. And this actually stood out to me because from what I observe, Ripple has been intentional in its messaging. And what I see happening more broadly is a shift away from speculation and noise and moving more as a whole towards clarity. I also heard Monica Long, who is the president of Ripple, talk about stablecoins. And again, what stayed with me wasn't the scale of predictions. It was the focus that she had. She talked about regulation, utility, transparency, not just as buzzwords, or not even as buzzwords, but as requirements. Listening to her, it felt like this was how the world is entering digital money. Money that is programmable, money that moves faster, money that is transparent. Not because it's novel, but because the systems we rely on are being asked to do more than they were designed to do in the beginning. There are a lot of players in the stablecoin space right now. But what stood out for me and also, before I say that, this is also just my own observation. But I noticed how intentionally Ripple has leaned into clarity, clear regulation, regulatory certainty, audibility, compliance reporting. And I really don't believe that these are meant to just be a box that they check. I think, in fact, it is foundational of who Ripple is. And this doesn't mean that they're the only ones that are building in this space, because like I said, there's many other builders of stablecoins. And it doesn't mean every answer is already settled, but it does signal a choice to build something institutions can actually engage with, not someday, but now. And that's the part I'm genuinely curious about. How banks, companies, and governments will begin to use these tools, not as an experiment, but as actual infrastructure. How programmable money changes the way the world we live in moves. How faster settlement offers dignity back to the people who need it most. And how transparency reshapes or even reestablishes trust. So, before I close this out, I want to say one thing very clearly. A stablecoin is digital money designed to stay stable, anchored to real-world assets. So, it can move predictably on modern financial rails. This is the entire idea. And when Ripple talks about RLUSD, what stands out to me isn't speed or scale. It's the decision to move forward through clarity. Clear regulation, clear backing, clear audits. Not as an afterthought, but as a starting point. And I was actually reading another article from JP Morgan where they describe the direction of stablecoin regulation and where it's moving. And one line actually stood out to me. They pointed out that new rules require stablecoins to be backed one-to-one with cash, short-term US Treasuries, and other high-quality assets. But they also raised open-ended question. Whether non-bank stablecoin issuers will have access to the kinds of protections that exist inside the traditional banking system, especially in moments of stress. And I think this question matters quite a bit. And what caught my attention is that Ripple has already taken steps to meet the banking conversation, not to rush ahead of it, but to be a part of it. I don't say that as a conclusion. I say it as something I'm watching in real time. Because if stablecoins are going to sit closer to the center of how money moves, then who is allowed to issue them, under what rules, and with what safeguards starts to matter quite a bit. Not for speculation, but for trust. So, if you're sitting at home watching all of this, you don't need to care about every technical detail, because I honestly don't either. But you do probably, and I'm going to take a bet on this, care about being paid on time, about money arriving when it's supposed to, about systems that don't add stress to an already complicated life. That's why I don't think stablecoins are just a crypto topic anymore. They're actually part of a bigger conversation, a conversation about how value moves and who those systems are actually built to serve. If this helped you see the topic a little more clearly, feel free to like or subscribe so that these conversations can keep going. And if you know someone who's felt the frustration of delayed payments or who's curious about where money is quietly headed, you can share this with them. And I'm not here to rush to conclusions if you haven't picked that up already. I'm here to keep understanding this in real time alongside you and to translate what I'm learning as clearly as I can. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today. I'm James Harris, and this is Layer 1. Till the next time. See you later.